Well, let's bring in three members of Parliament now from the foyer of the House of Commons. Mark Miller is Parliamentary Secretary for Crown Indigenous Relations. Erin O'Toole is the Conservative Foreign Affairs critic, and Randall Garrison is the NDP's National Defence critic. Good to see all three of you.
Glad to be here, Andrew.
Mr. Miller, let's start with you. The Liberal majority on the Defence Committee yesterday shut down opposition attempts to hold hearings on the Norman prosecution and how it happened. Now we have this report today in the Globe and Mail that the Prime Minister himself got the RCMP investigation rolling by saying he wanted to know where the leak came from. Does that change your view on the need for more investigation on the role of the Prime Minister himself?
Oh, absolutely not. Look, in this case, and it's important for viewers to know, the highest form of adjudication in this country took place in a courtroom, and the prosecution, as it has to do, did not meet the test of finding it reasonably culpable that Mr. Norman would be found guilty, and that's a very heavy burden to meet. That does not mean that leaks didn't occur. It doesn't mean that when leaks did occur, they weren't reported, and in this case by the Prime Minister. But to be clear for viewers, the Prime Minister doesn't have any more powers than any particular citizen does. It wouldn't be lawful for him, nor physically possible for the Prime Minister to do what's being alleged. And so the former clerk was seized of the matter, and information passed on to the RCMP, who then, as an independent body that it is in a country like ours, took the action that it should have had. It's important to note that in all cases, both sides have said that no interference has taken place by the government, and that is still the case.
So, Mr. O'Toole, then let me ask you, based on these new details about the Prime Minister's potential role, how does that change this story now going forward?
Well, it confirms what we've been saying from the start. The political interference started at the beginning. I've called it direction, deception, and delay. The direction, now we see with the Globe story, was the Prime Minister, through his National Security Advisor, his clerk of his Privy Council. Canadians know the Prime Minister has a few more tools than the average Canadian, despite what Mr. Miller says. Absolutely. Then the deception happened when they were using code words with respect to Mark Norman's name to avoid disclosure. And then Ms. Heinen, the defense lawyer for Admiral Norman, said for months and months and months they were getting delays, lack of sharing of documents, redactions of documents. So the Trudeau team frustrated the process throughout. It's now clear he began the process. He was upset. The article showed he was angry about the leak. They then hired the CBC journalist that broke the leak, but then launched this investigation. And Mark Norman was centred out despite the fact that 73 people were aware of the leak. So the Prime Minister bears responsibility for this, and I think the Liberal members of the Defence Committee should revisit their vote yesterday quashing any examination of the Norman affair.
Mr. Garrison, what's your reaction on the Globe report and you know, how that followed what happened yesterday at the Defence Committee?
Well, I think what we see here is the SNC-Lavalin playbook again, where the government says nothing to see here because the justice system survived our attempts to influence it. Yeah. And so once again, then we look for the victims that get thrown under the bus by this government. And this time, instead of caucus members, it's public servants who worked in the PCO. So it's exactly the same pattern we saw. And instead of repeating this slow drip torture path of trying to find out what happened, yesterday we could have voted to have those hearings in front of the Defence Committee where everybody would get to tell their version of the story under the protection of parliamentary privilege. And I still remain profoundly disappointed, as I said yesterday, that Vice Admiral Norman doesn't get the chance to tell his side of the story. And I was particularly disturbed just a minute ago to hear Vice Admiral Norman being slagged again by Mark when he says, you know, the charges were dropped, not that he was cleared. Right, and so that tells me that it's really important that we have him come and tell the story to a parliamentary committee.
So, Mr. Miller, then let's go back to you, because in your view, then, is there anything wrong then with the Prime Minister of Canada, the head of the government, saying he wants to find out where the leak of cabinet secrets come from, and perhaps the message that would send either implicitly or explicitly to the bureaucracy and the Privy Council to get some answers? Because according to the Globe report, that's exactly what happened.
Well, first, Andrew, I want to highlight how Admiral Norman has served this country loyalty, and as someone who has served in the armed forces like Aaron, I want to thank him for his service. But look, my friends in the Conservative Party may be fond of conspiracy theories. They may make good Facebook posts, but those tinfoil helmets need to come off, and they need to realize that we live in a democracy, a pluralistic democracy, where the justice system worked, and particularly a former lawyer like Aaron should recognize that these are independent institutions, and they did act independently in this case, and this has been confirmed at all levels, even if you look at the most conservative leading journalists that have a view on this.
I guess.
And the Prime Minister, to talk to you about your point specifically, if the Prime Minister notices that there's a leak, or any particular person that sits in cabinet, they are obliged to report it and need to take the measures that are expedient in order to make sure these things don't occur. A leak is a very serious offense.
Right. So, Mr. O'Toole, then, based on that, then what is the issue with a Prime Minister pushing to get to the bottom of a leak of cabinet secrets?
Well, Randall's right. This is a replay of SNC. Remember, SNC broke. The Prime Minister said the Globe and Mail story is false. Another Globe and Mail story here today. I have no problem with the Prime Minister asking questions about a leak where his government tried to kill a shipbuilding deal in Quebec. They should just be forthright about it. Our question has always been, if the investigation gave him 73 names, why was only Mark Norman fired publicly from his job or removed from command, run through the ringer? Twice the Prime Minister speculated he would be in court before the charges were even laid. Was the Prime Minister getting regular updates from his National Security Advisor and from the team he charged with investigating this? Did they ask him who should be centered in the investigation? Why was Mark Norman the fall guy? There's almost 100 people that were aware of the meeting being scheduled and what Scott Bryson did with respect to the Davy contract. Why only Mark Norman dragged through the mud? That's our central question.
Mr. Garrison, I'll put the same question to you as well. If leaks happen in cabinet, and we know they can be quite common in Ottawa, what is the issue with the Prime Minister trying to find out the source of that leak?
Well, he did that. He asked the Privy Council office to investigate. They came back and said it was impossible to determine who had leaked, and that's where things should have stopped. Instead, someone, and the only one who could possibly have done that, gave instructions to his staff in the Privy Council office to take this further with the RCMP. And when the Prime Minister has already publicly said this is going to end up before the courts, you can't tell me that he's not trying to influence the process.
Well, let's turn to some other big news today, and that's, of course, news that Canada and the U.S. have reached an agreement to lift steel and aluminum tariffs after nearly a year. Mr. Miller, what can you tell us about how that agreement came about and what some of the key details are?
Andrew, you can take any view on how this government has performed in its mandate, but on the NAFTA file, this is a government that has been laser-focused on the single most important issue for this country, and that is its trade partner to the south of us, which is very unpredictable. We fought to the bitter end to get a better NAFTA deal, despite calls from the Conservatives to cave on a number of key issues. We didn't do so. The U.S., in turn, imposed steel tariffs, which, let's recall, were based on national security issues and not on a trade basis. We called those spurious, and we imposed countermeasures to the tune of $16 billion. Again, we have integrated economies with the U.S., so there can be perverse effects on the Canadian economy and on the U.S. economy. But the announcement today is consistent with this government's fighting for steelworkers, fighting for an industry in Canada which is key to who we are. And it's just evidence that this government has performed in the face of exceedingly strong trade wins from our southern partners, but also across the world.
Well, Mr. O'Toole, let me go to you. What will you be watching for, in the days and weeks to come in a deal with the United States to lift these tariffs after nearly 1 year?
Well, Justin Trudeau should deliver a nice case of Niagara wine to the Mexicans, because both the Mexicans negotiated a trade deal with the United States before Canada, and then we had to join that deal. Now it also seems the Mexicans reached an agreement on tariffs before Canada and asked for Canada to be included. The U.S. relationship has probably been the biggest miss by the Trudeau government. The last time he visited steelworkers over a year ago, he told them, "I've got your back. There will be no tariffs." Well, there were tariffs. They've totally misplayed the 232 tariff piece. And look, USMCA getting a deal is positive. It's not a good deal by any stretch of the imagination. And it's really sad that Canada, with a security partnership through NORAD, with a free trade agreement that's a decade older than Mexico being in NAFTA, the fact that we're the third player now and the U.S. deals with Mexico better than they do with Canada, I think is a testament, like India, like China, like Saudi Arabia, like the Philippines, which pulled its ambassadors. Canada's really back under Justin Trudeau, back of the bus.
Well, let me just follow up on that with you then. Could, a Conservative government dealing with the same president in the White House, prone to making decisions the way he is, could a Conservative government have, shortened this process at all?
I'm glad you asked that. We told Minister Freeland to focus on security. Security and trade in the United States go hand in hand. Focus on ballistic missile defense to make NORAD a full partnership. Why did we say that? We said that because President Trump needed to be reminded that only Canada is a domestic security partner with the United States, not Mexico, not anyone else. That could have been a way to avoid security tariffs. Australia avoided tariffs. Other countries had reduced tariffs. Canada got no deal because Justin Trudeau used his progressive agenda to contrast himself against Donald Trump. He didn't put jobs, he didn't put security, he put things like climate change and other issues that he knew Donald Trump would not reach a deal on. So we've got to be strategic with the U.S., particularly now with the Trump presidency.
Well, let me turn to Mr. Garrison. What will the NDP be watching for as we sort out what this deal means over the next few days, the next few weeks?
Well, I have to say it's a good thing if these tariffs are coming off. It's a good thing for the steel industry. It's a good thing for aluminum. It's a good thing for Canadian workers. It's just the fact that they've been there for a year that is the bad thing that the Liberals said they would avoid. But when you strip that away and look at what we've got here, we've got the Conservatives and Liberals who competed to see who could give the most to Trump to get a new deal. And I think both of them has betrayed a real weakness in our relationship with the United States. And it's quite regrettable because what we've got in a new deal is a concessionary deal. And we've got sectors in our economy that will suffer greatly, in particular supply management sectors, which I also like to call our food security sectors. So not a good deal, but it's really a strange contest over who would have given more to get a deal earlier.
Well, Mr. Miller, I'll let you have the quick last word on that then. Just let you respond to, this notion that did Canada make too many concessions?
Well, Canadians will know that at a time of need, the Liberal Party was there for them, and this government has performed exceedingly well. The Conservatives actively worked to undermine this trade deal, even despite Rona Ambrose supporting us. And when they talk about strategic missile defense and the leader of their party, Andrew Scheer, not being neutral on the big issues of our time, he can't even take a position on nuclear testing, on the missile pact that they're putting forward. So he needs to take a position. He needs to have his cards on the table so Canadians to decide who he is.
All right, we'll leave the discussion there. Hope all three of you have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks very much.